So this afternoon, I have the pleasure of meeting with my friend Susan Manfill, virtual call. And normally we'd probably be sharing a glass of rosé or lunch somewhere in Provence at this point, talking about definitely rosé, wine, or something else. But anyway, instead we're virtual at two ends of the North American continent. But I'm very pleased to be able to speak to Susan this afternoon and want to understand more about a project that she and her husband Townie are working on, a wine project, as well as for our listeners to understand more about Provence WineZine, I think I'm mispronouncing it. And
yeah, either works.
Either works. And generally what you guys are working on. So maybe we could start with you telling us about the Provence WineZine.
Okay. Well, Provence WineZine is an online magazine. It is devoted to the stories of winemakers and other people who are in the wine business, focusing on Provence and on the southern Rhone area of the Rhone region. We do talk about wine, and once in a while I do venture to let people know what I think about that wine, but in general it's about the stories of these winemakers. We do venture into the northern wine region and actually have some articles about wineries in the United States that make wines in the Rhone style, acquiesce wine, Kita wine, for example, who in some cases even get their grapes, their vines from the southern Rhone area. So that's our focus. And I started off writing a blog called The Modern Troubadours. Started that in 2008 when we were spending a lot of time in France. And I realized that I was writing a lot about wine. So I started thinking about another online magazine, and then I won a trip from the Wines of Provence to Provence, and they opened a lot of doors for me to those wineries, and Provence WineZine was born.
Huh, I didn't know that part of the story. So you touched on this, but you had the opportunity, you and Townie, your family, had the opportunity to live in Le Marin for a while. And can you tell us a bit about that time and how long you were in France and how things evolved from there?
Sure. We went to Provence for the first time in 1998. We traveled a lot in France, but we had never been to Provence. It seemed like everybody was talking about it. So we went there in the spring of that year, and we fell in love with it. So we went back again, and we went back again, which is really unusual for us. And we decided we wanted to spend an extended time there. We thought a lot about how could we do that. I was teaching part-time, Townie was working full-time in the printing industry, and a blessing in disguise occurred when he was let go, as the printing industry began to decline, and he received a very generous severance package. So we were off, and we chose Le Marin. We knew it. That was the first village that we had been to when we went over there the first time. We loved it. We enrolled our daughter in school there. They were very welcoming. She was the only English-speaking child there, and they loved that they could practice their English, she could practice her French. We would drop her off at school, and then Townie and I would go explore. It was really a wonderful time. So that was in 2002. August of 2002, we went over, and we were there for a semester, about 6 months. It was a marvelous time. We liked it so much that we bought some property there.
Right.
So.
And obviously, subsequently, you've been back many times.
Many times.
How old was Alex at that time?
She was 7, I believe. So she might have been, when we were there, she had just finished 5th grade. I think she was around 10 at the time when we stayed for the 6 months.
6 months. And what was it like to live in Provence versus living in North America?
Well, the pace is much slower, as you well know. And honestly, that takes a little getting used to. It, it's one thing to relax over a long lunch, lots of wine and multiple courses, but it's another thing to try to hook up your telephone or open a bank account, because those kinds of things take a long time. So there's some getting used to that pace. But once you do, once you also learn that everything closes from 12:30 to 3, basically, so there's a little hurry up and get going in the morning, get things done so you can relax over lunch. Once you get used to all of that, it's a great lifestyle. We should adopt more aspects of that in this country, certainly.
And Townie speaks French, right?
He speaks fluent French.
Yeah.
He grew up overseas, went to French-speaking schools in Africa, well, when he lived in Belgium, where he also spoke French. So he's very fluent in French. I'm not. Alex became completely fluent in French as well, and she always prided herself on her Provençal accent.
So with some French speakers around, you probably had some maybe more in-depth experiences than you would have if none of you spoke any French.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I think it was frustrating for me, although my husband is a great interpreter, but there's so much conversation at the table, for example, in France, about really interesting subjects that are explored in great depth that I didn't have the benefit of fully understanding. But yeah, it opened many doors for us.
And you touched on this a little bit earlier, but obviously you had a bit of wine over lunch or dinner while you were there, but how did you really get interested in the Provençal wine industry, I'll say, and the Rhone Valley wines?
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head. We had a lot of wine when we were there, and we were in the midst of, in the Luberon, you're in the midst of many estates. In fact, in Lomoran, there is an estate within walking distance of the center of the village, the Chateau Fondeur. Now there are more chateaus. There's another one, or more estates. There's another one I just visited when we were there in February. That's Domaine de la Cavalière, which is also within walking distance from the center of the village. So wine is everywhere. And I became interested in it. And when I started talking to people, I became fascinated with their stories. And I think that's the psychologist in me.
Right.
People think that winemaking is, people romanticize winemaking. It's very easy to think of a great year. I think it's called the Peter Mayle book that was turned into a movie. It's very romantic, but there's, it's much more complicated than that, and not always easy.
Right. Yeah. And you've done some very interesting interviews over the years and met winemakers all over Provence.
We have. I've been very, very fortunate. I think the first articles I wrote were about visiting wineries in the Luberon. So not interviewing winemakers so much, just sort of a travel log. The first real interview I did was with Master Cadenet, and I interviewed the 7th generation winemaker, Mathieu, and his sister, Maud, and their father. They just had their 200th anniversary. And it was just, you know, it was amazing to be able to talk to a family who'd been on the same property, tending to the same vines for all those years.
Okay.
And interestingly, I asked Mathieu, who speaks English, but maybe not as fluent well, he speaks very good English, but I said to him, what have been your greatest challenges? And I expected him to say something about the weather or a hailstorm, for example. And instead, he was very quiet for a long time, which made me think, oh my goodness, he didn't understand the question. Should I repeat it? What should I do? And he came back and he said, the hardest part in a multi-generational family winery is trying to put your own stamp on what it is that you're doing. And it was such a surprise to me to hear that made so much sense, that he said, everybody in previous generations, why would I want to disrupt what they're doing? But I'd like to add something to it.
Yeah.
So interviewing winemakers is always interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting, his comment too. I can absolutely understand that.
Yeah.
And if you're making a good product, why change it? But on the other hand, now it's my baby to move forward with.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's that balance that I hear echoes of in other interviews.
Yeah.
As well.
Interesting. So moving to definitely a different topic. Basically 2 years ago, in August 2018, your beautiful daughter, Alex Manfield, passed away of complications from PANDAS, a disorder that few of us knew about before. And maybe you could explain to us, what is PANDAS?
Okay. It is generally agreed nowadays to be a type of encephalitis, and a type of encephalitis that affects the basal ganglia area of the brain. PANDAS itself is an acronym, and it stands for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorder, what's the A, after strep. So in this particular case of PANDAS, it is characterized primarily by what looks like obsessions and compulsions, maybe tics, maybe some eating disorders, sleep disorders, some somatic complaints, fogginess, and you're thinking a whole array of symptoms. And it follows a strep, having contracted strep. In my daughter's case, she did not have strep as a child. It was initially conceived of as a pediatric disorder. Now they understand that this can occur after puberty, in adolescence, and in young adulthood. She contracted it when she was 19 years old at the university, and she had a bout of strep. And shortly after that, she began exhibiting symptoms that we would later recognize, or she would later recognize, as being evidence of PANDAS. So I should also add that PANDAS falls under the broader category of something called PANS, which is basically the same symptoms, but the trigger, such as strep, they may not be able to identify the trigger, because it can be caused by other types of bacteria and viruses. Huh. So she, being an adult with a more fully developed brain, did not have the severity of symptoms that children do. And she was a highly functioning individual. But the inflammation in her brain continued to affect her functioning. Right. And when she died, her brain was autopsied by the National Institutes of Mental Health, and there was brain damage there in the basal ganglia.
Wow. Caused by the strep, or
caused by, I guess I forgot to say this part, caused by when the strep occurs, your immune system under normal circumstances goes into action. And in the case of these situations, the immune system goes rogue and you have an autoimmune disorder. So it's actually the antibodies that go into the brain, not the strep.
Not the strep. Huh. That sounds terrible. So obviously for any of us to comprehend your grief, your and Townie's grief, it would be impossible. But I have to commend you for being able to put one step forward and move forward and try and increase the awareness of PANS and PANDAS. And most recently, you've embarked on a project to increase that awareness, and it's called a Tabla. So maybe you could tell us about a Tabla.
Let me put it in just a little bigger context in that when Alex died, we established a fund in her name to fund research and to raise awareness and to educate the public and doctors about this, about PANDAS and PANS. Because Alex, when she was finally diagnosed by Dr. Beth Latimer, the top neurologist in the country as far as, or one of the top as far as PANDAS goes, she was so excited and she said, I'm going to write about this so that nobody else goes through what I have to go through. And she didn't have a chance to do that, so we've carried on. So the Tabla project is an awareness project so that everybody learns about PANDAS and PANS, and nobody else has to see a long line of doctors, as she did, with no one diagnosing her until the very end. This particular project started off as both a fundraiser and an awareness project, but because of COVID, we had to curtail part of that, and it's an awareness project. And it's a way of combining my interest in wine, and Alex also had a huge interest in wine. So we took that and we said, how can we use that and make people aware of these disorders? If you remember milk cartons going back a few decades that had missing children pictured on them, that's kind of what gave me the idea that why don't we have a bottle of wine with a message on it about PANDAS? So it'll be sitting on the table and people will say, what is that? And they will go to the trouble, I hope, of looking it up. And if they don't, we're giving them a booklet that goes around the wine bottle, which I'll show you in a minute. It's called a Tabla because we always came to the table as a family to talk about everything that happened during the day. And we like the idea of coming to the table and we talk about the good, we talk about the bad, we talk about challenges, we talk about successes. And let's talk about PANDAS. Let's learn more about it. And so we shall I tell you how we proceeded with that idea? Yeah. Okay, so we thought, all right, who can make the wine? And we immediately thought of Chateau Barbara Bell because we knew the winemaker. And Alex, the summer before she died, this was one of her go-to wines. It's a very much you can drink it all year round, but it's a summer red. It's light, it's perfect to go with hamburgers and charcuterie and that pizza, that sort of thing. So we knew Madeline, and we knew the importer into New Hampshire. Dealing with wine, it's very tricky on these kinds of things, and it really did take a lot of people to make this work. But we approached our friend who was the importer, Jacques Navarre, and said, what do you think about this idea? And so he thought it was a good idea. And so we approached Madeline, who's 30 years old. She is the fourth generation wine director of Chateau Barbara Bell, which is in Provence, not far from Lomoran and in Rogna. And we explained the idea, and she said, count me in. I'd like to do anything that I can to help the situation, to help make more people aware of this. And then we thought, well, who can do the label? And we immediately thought of our friend Gerard Sirdi, whose studio is in Lomohan and who we've known since our first trip to Provence. And he had taken an interest in Alex's artwork. And she befriended him. They would paint together at Cafe Gabi. And we asked him, he had actually written a poem for her that was read at her service too.
Oh.
And we asked him if he would be willing to paint something that we could use as the label. So I'm not sure if you can see that. This is the label, based on the painting that he created. Down here is information about PANDAS. This was created by a local graphic artist, Susan Hamilton at Phineas Press. And the center of this painting is Alex walking through the village with Cafe Gabi on one side where she used to hang out. And then Gerard is right here painting the scene, as he often is at Cafe Gabi, painting the scene. So we added a booklet. It's a 12-page booklet that talks about what PANDAS is. It talks a little bit about Alex, talks about the winemaker, Gerard Sirdi, or excuse me, the painter, Gerard Sirdi, and the winemaker, Chateau Barbabel, Madeleine Herbeau. She just was married, and her last name is hard to pronounce, Premiere. So we just launched it. It took a while, but we had to have the labels printed. We had to go through all the paperwork of getting it brought into our state, and it was finally launched just a couple weeks ago. And sold out. We launched it at South Street and Vine, across the street from us, good friends of ours who own that wine and cheese store. And we thought in the middle of COVID that, well, we'd get a few people, and we got over 100 people.
Wow.
And they bought all of the wine. And in fact, Townie kept going back to our house. Fortunately, we're across the street from the wine store, and bringing over more cases, as I was thinking, okay, my brother is not going to get a case. Okay, I think I can ask this person if they can wait on getting a case. And we sold it all, and people left empty-handed.
Wow.
So we're having some more wine made, we hope. And if everything goes well, we will have some more in the fall.
That's fantastic.
So.
And can you tell us a little bit of,
cut out?
I know, here too. I think
you're kind of frozen, but okay.
Can you hear me?
Am I okay?
Yeah,
yes, there we go. There you are. Okay.
And can you tell us a bit about the wine itself? You said it's a red wine. I'm sure it's typical Provençal grapes, but I don't know that. Maybe.
It's maybe not typical, because, well, Grenache would be typical, Syrah. It's 40% Grenache, 30% Syrah, and then it also has some Cabernet Sauvignon in it, which is not uncommon in that area of Provence. But widely speaking, you don't see that much Cabernet Sauvignon. So the grapes come from the best plots on their large, beautiful estate, and they were picked in 2017 in the fall. They had a long maceration, and then were placed in the typical cement vats in Provence for a couple of years, and bottled in January 2020. So just recently. Just recently.
And if so, it's sold out in New Hampshire at the moment, but you're working on additional supply.
Yes.
But there is supply in Lomohan. Is that correct?
There is. Yeah. Yes. There's supply at a small store in Lomohan, right in the center of town, called de la cuisine au vin. It's very near Cafe Gabi,
Okay.
owned by Hervé Gustia. Oh, I'm sorry, Hervé. It's owned by Hervé. Everyone knows him as Hervé. Yes.
Okay, and I'll get the details of that later, the store name and an address later, but that's perfect.
Yeah.
So if anybody is in Provence, they could pick up a bottle there or a case.
Yes, they can.
Yep. And you wrote about the project at the end of July. So as you say, it launched then, and the interest, of course, has been considerable. You mentioned to me, I think in an email or something, that it was really a two-pronged, and you did touch on this a little bit earlier, that it was a two-pronged campaign idea. So maybe you could talk about kind of what the vision, COVID aside, what the vision is for starting the conversation.
Sure. The fundraising prong was something that here in Portsmouth with the historic properties is often done. And that is that you arrange for hosts to provide dinner and wine, and people buy a place at that particular house and go for dinner. And in our particular situation, we were going to serve the wine and or send them home with a bottle of wine. We never actually crossed that bridge. But the idea being that they would be there at the table and there would be a discussion about pandas, among many other subjects that would be discussed at the table.
Sure.
And as I said, ideally they would go home with a bottle of wine so that they in turn could share the wine at a table, a tabla, come to the table, and the word would be spread. But since having dinner in a stranger's house is not terribly appealing right now, we have postponed that. But we had lined up people from several different countries, including Canada, who would be willing to host a dinner and have people come in. So we will continue with those plans once COVID has settled, and I will let you know when that happens.
Yeah. Well, I think regardless, it's a very good way to have whether it's a stranger's house or a group of friends around your table. I think it's a very good way to have a conversation about the disease and to create the awareness that probably doesn't exist today outside of a small circle.
Right. It's the number of doctors, pediatricians, neurologists, psychiatrists who are not familiar with this type of encephalitis is shocking. It presents, it presents in many cases as a psychiatric disorder, and it will not respond to the typical psychiatric treatments. It's a different type of treatment that addresses the immune system issues that's needed. And yet, if psychiatrists don't know about pandas, they will treat it with psychiatric drugs and it doesn't go away.
Right.
And the longer one suffers from this, the more difficult it is to treat. Alex saw quite a few doctors, and not one ever said, "Have you ever heard of pandas?" with the exception of what's known as, or what she was told was a diagnostician, person who just specializes in making diagnoses. And he talked to her over the telephone and said, "Have you ever heard of this?" Not a single other doctor
ever said
had diagnosed this.
Huh.
She had multiple other diagnoses.
Right. So good for you guys for creating this kind of project to raise awareness. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you.
And what is the best way for listeners, for Perfectly Provence readers, to get their names on a list for a bottle, or to find out when there's more stock in the US or otherwise?
So we do have a waiting list, and I thought that the email address is rather long, so I thought that I would send it to you.
Okay.
That would be the best way of getting it across.
Okay.
But we do have a wait list, and that would be the best way.
Perfect. And on September 7th, which would have been or is Alex's birthday, what would you like us all to do?
Thank you for asking. We would like everyone to have a toast to Alex, raising a glass from this bottle of wine, if you have it, or from any bottle of wine that you like, or your favorite beverage. Maybe it's a cup of tea or sparkling water. And raise a toast to her and every other person who's been diagnosed with PANDAS and PANS, and make a promise that we will spread the word and make everyone aware of these horrendous diseases, so that more money can be raised, more research can be done, and that we can find more effective treatments and hopefully a cure at some point. Then you can take those, if you take a picture of yourself having that toast and send it to me, and I can also give you my email address, and you could perhaps put it in your article, and I will post them on an Instagram account, the Alex Mantle Memorial Fund Instagram account, and then they will also be shown on her on another account, the Alex Mantle Memorial Fund.
Perfect.
It's easier just to write it all out.
Yeah.
I was going to get a sign so I could just hold it up, but I guess I didn't.
If you send me the information,
all right, I'll send you that. But the more people that we can get to send a picture, just making a commitment to make everyone aware of PANDAS and PANS, that would be the best birthday present that we could give our daughter and everybody else who is experiencing PANDAS and PANS. We've got to get a better treatment. Got to eradicate it.
And quicker diagnoses.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We had one of the first things that our fund did was to have a symposium for doctors in this area, and it sold out. And we had the top researchers and top clinicians in the country come to speak to this group of people, of a little over 100, about what is PANDAS, what is PANS, what causes it, how do we treat it, and how does it get into your brain, how does it cross the blood-brain barrier. So we had a terrific array of doctors, of researchers, and physicians and clinicians talk to other doctors and a few parents about that subject.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yeah.
And I get the sense that that at Tab, or maybe just this part of a Tabla is the start of a chapter or a book or several chapters, but that you have sort of bigger plans for continuing the discussion and the awareness campaign and all of that.
Absolutely. We'd like to continue the Tabla project with more wine being brought to the table. And we have in our plans another symposium, which would be for the helping professions, primarily psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health workers, on learning to distinguish anorexia, an obsessive compulsive disorder, other anxiety disorders that are due to psychiatric factors, how to distinguish those from those that are due to immunological factors, because they need to be treated differently. So that's one of our next big projects.
Yeah. I can only begin to imagine how complex that is from a diagnostic standpoint.
But it begins with awareness.
Right.
That's where it begins. And I my husband and I don't want, as I've written many times, that we don't want another person or family to have to go through what we've gone through, or to spend as many days, months, even years trying to find a diagnosis and a treatment for this.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think that was the end of my questions, but perhaps you had something more you want to add, or there's Tom.
Do you hear my dog? So I'll just add that along the way, we've met some fabulous people, and they have expressed their gratitude to us for working on making people more aware and educating them. And I would like to say that this is helpful to us too. This warms our heart to be a part of this process, and I know that Alex would want us to do this. So it works. It's good for us, and I'm glad to be a part of a group that's trying to change things.
Yeah. Well, good for both of you, and thank you for making all of us more aware. And we will all raise a glass on the 7th of September.
Excellent. And send me your photo.
And send your photo. Exactly.
All right.